This week on the Facility Playbook, I got to sit down with Matt from Swell Spark. Previously known for creating breakout rooms and axe throwing bars, he is now with us today talking about Sinkers Lounge, a high-end mini indoor golf putt-putt experience in downtown Kansas City. Not something you normally hear when you think about golf or putt-putt. We're going to learn from Matt how he got into the downtown Kansas City market, what he learned along the way, what he failed on and what he's going to fix for the next one, and a lot more on how he reaches a different demographic in downtown Kansas City. Looking to learn more? Check out this episode of the Facility Playbook. What's up, everybody? Do you own or manage a facility? Well, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Facility Playbook. I'm Luke Wade, founder and CEO of Facility Ally, and this podcast is about helping facility managers and owners learn from pioneers and veterans in the industry who have already built and managed successful sports facilities, entertainment venues, and clubs. Did you know that most of the facilities I just mentioned use between 4 and 6 different softwares to manage their reservations, lessons, memberships, and more? Revolutionize your facility with Facility Ally's all-in-one system. Learn more at facilityally.com. And today, we're an amazing entertainment concept with Matt Baysinger, CEO of Swell Spark, who helped create Sinkers. Thanks for having us today, Matt.
Thanks for being here.
Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to Swell Spark and Sinkers.
Man, it doesn't make any sense, but I was a high school guidance counselor. I had summers off, and I started a soda shop in Lawrence, Kansas. We had 1,300 different kinds of soda from all over the country. I'm a soda nerd at heart, you know. But what I realized, just really quickly within that, is people love unique experiences. And so the long and the short, I'll breeze through it, is traveling with my wife, saw an escape room, thought it would be fun, decided to go in and build an escape room, had a lot of early success. Within that, started really understand the role of real estate, the role of media, the role of marketing, the role of B2B sales. And so as we started looking at what else was in that space, call it entertainment or small box entertainment, we then kind of stumbled into axe throwing. We found that in Toronto and brought it to Kansas City and then kind of expanded elsewhere. And then in April of 20 was when we were supposed to open Sinkers Lounge, our mini golf concept. Delayed a couple of years, but we opened here in Kansas City in April of 2022. Been operating for about a year and a half now.
Well, that is a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But I love it. And what you said is it really sounds like you're focused on experiences.
Correct.
A fun social experiences, whether it's drinking soda with a friend, throwing axes, or playing putt-putt.
Yep. No, I think a lot of people go into business to solve their own problems, right? And what I've realized is me as a social creature, like I'm not one to go to a bar and sit there. I'm like, hey, Luke, how's it going, buddy? You know, I find when I'm at my friend's house is we end up in the backyard throwing a football while we're talking, or we end up doing something. And so for me, it's like, man, the best form of entertainment is when I'm an active participant. And so my life the last 8 years has been finding the best concepts to do that. Figuring out how to do it really well, and then, opening those things and reproducing them.
I love it. And I'm very similar. I like to go out and play ping pong, play pickleball, whatever it may be, and have a conversation or go for a walk. So I can totally relate there. Everything else you mentioned seems pretty new. Breakout rooms didn't exist. Soda bar didn't exist. Axe throwing didn't exist. But Sinkers, where we're at today, putt-putt's been around for a long time. It used to be a part of bowling alleys and a whole bunch of different things. So how did that kind of get thrown in the mix after you kind of created these newer concepts?
You say bowling, it's kind of interesting to think about bowling as a case study, because bowling's been around forever, right? And bowling at one point was the most popular sport in America, and then it died a fiery death. And then it's actually had a huge resurgence that not a lot of folks are talking about. And I think the primary reason is because great operators were finally able to take the concept of bowling and make it relevant again, not by the bowling lanes, those really haven't changed, but by the technology that surrounds the bowling, by the food and beverage offerings, by opening new facilities that don't have 80 years of cigarette smoke smell, right? Like, people updated the concept. And so I think with mini golf as well, like arguably mini golf died, right? It died years ago, other than some little pockets in Florida or some tourists, Branson. But for the most part, mini golf facilities have been going out of business for decades. And in the UK, there's really been this mini golf resurgence in the UK that started about 10 years ago. And they took this decades old concept and they said, hey, remember the nostalgia? Like, what if we couple that with great food and beverage and we make it a place that 20-somethings and 30-somethings and 40-somethings actually want to go to? And so they started doing that in the UK and they started having a lot of success. And then we found it, and so mini golf traditionally and historically is done on multiple acres on the outskirts of town where land is affordable, right? We had to ask and answer the question, how do you take mini golf and how do you put it in 5,500 square feet instead of 42,000 or 80,000 square feet outside? And so that's where we get this really, I think, good, nice, clean, contemporary version of mini golf where, yes, mini golf matters and that is the primary thing that you're doing here, but most folks are walking around and there's tables for your food and beverage options as well to make it a fun night out, not just a morning out.
I love that. And for everyone who's not here, we're in the middle of downtown Kansas City, home of the Kansas City Chiefs. And we're literally surrounded by sky rises, all kinds of apartments, everything around us. So to your point, we're in the middle of the city with this amazing putt-putt, and I love that. There's also something unique here that's not just putt-putt. You guys, is tabletop created? Tell us a little bit about the other game that's available.
Yeah, so I have to preface by saying, a lot of people are like, Matt, you're so creative. And there's probably some truth to that statement, right? But everything I've done, it's when you go see a version of something and you're like, I think we can do that better, right? And so escape rooms initially came from Southeast Asia. Axe throwing initially came from Canada. Mini golf originally came from the UK. But there are places or facilities that have created, mini golf on tables or these extra mini golf type games. And so we saw a concept that we're like, man, that's pretty neat, but we think we could do it a lot better. And having to ask and answer the question of, again, how do you do mini golf in 5,500 square feet? You don't. You can't do 18 holes in mini golf. And so we fabricated, created, drew up this idea called tabletop golf. And tabletop golf is, these 4-foot by 8-foot tables where you're actually playing a mini golf type game, but on essentially a pool table with a modified pool cue. We call it a sinker, right? And so it's a combination of, billiards and shuffleboard and mini golf all kind of merged into one. But what's really neat about it is each hole is very, very different, and a little bit different from mini golf is they're all replayable. And so most people, if they spend 45 minutes to an hour playing mini golf, they might spend an hour or 2 hours playing tabletop because you're trying to figure out how to get a hole-in-one on every hole. We're super proud of it because it's something that we designed, created, in-house with our fabrication team, and the response to it has been amazing, right? If you look on the Google reviews or if you talk to your friends, they're like, hey, the mini golf was good. Have you played tabletop yet? That thing was incredible,
Totally. We actually came down here with a bunch of my employees in the companies and came and played putt-putt and played that, and everybody was just raving about how awesome that was. So kudos to you guys. That's really cool. So maybe, I think I skipped over it a little bit. Tell us what Sinkers is.
Yeah, so Sinkers Lounge, right? That's the name of this place. And so we're trying to think of, hey, what golf buzzwords are there? What's not used? And so a sinker is a really good putter, right? That's someone who's singing the putt. But Sinkers Lounge is our upscale indoor mini golf cocktail bar. We try to cater to your date night, but we also try to cater to B2B and corporate audiences and folks who want to come out and have a great time. But what's really fun about this place is the malleability is if you come, at Saturday at noon, you're going to see a lot of families. That's great. We welcome that. We want them to come. You come Saturday at 9 p.m. and it's almost like a club. The music's a lot louder. People are dressed to the nines and they're getting ready to have, it's part of their experience in downtown Kansas City.
I love that. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you've had? Let's talk about from opening the facility to managing it.
Yeah, this concept in many ways was our biggest risk that we've ever taken, right? If you take a step back and think about how we have started things. Breakout KC, we did this, elbow grease build in the River Market area of Kansas City, which now is a great, really cool space, right? But River Market 9 years ago, was not what it is today, right? The phone calls we were getting is like, hey, is this place safe? And so that was a very elbow grease type build. I think our total investment to start that thing was like $75,000 in the initial thing. It was cheap, right? Mm-hmm. It was amazing, but it was inexpensive. And then you look at our initial rendition of Blade and Timber, right? We were in the West Bottoms, and we were in a warehouse and we stood up some lanes and we threw out. It was a minimum viable product to see hey, are people going to come? And so our initial investment there was, $30,000 on a very friendly lease because we're and if this doesn't work, no problem.
Yeah.
We're in Power and Light. We're in arguably the most expensive district in Kansas City. We're Main and Main. And so to sign a 10-year commitment to open a concept that we hadn't actually tried yet was terrifying.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying. But we felt confident. We felt confident that it was going to be a good fit, and that downtown, knowing, I mean, we have Blade and Timber next door, literally. And so we knew the audience, we knew the type of customers who were coming here, and we just thought it would be a great fit. So the initial day one was really scary of just okay, we built this beautiful thing. Are people going to show up?
Yeah.
And fortunately it did.
So you talked a little bit about the demographics. You have families during the day, on the weekends, and then, kind of the club atmosphere at night. Who do you target? Is there anybody specifically you're targeting for your demographics?
It's interesting, and you talked in your introduction, right, about the technologies that people have and the technologies that people use. And having done this now for 9 years, our target market changes, right? When you think of when you first open something, a lot of times you don't even need to advertise, because you're getting think in your head, that mental picture of the people who used to wait in line for iPhones, right? That's who showed up. The people who they're the early adopters among their friends group. They want to be the first to have something. They want to be the person to be I was here, you have to go to that thing that I've already discovered because I'm really cool. So our first group of folks was that, right? Early adopters. And then you kind of move on to the friends of those people, right? They're oh my gosh, Luke told me the thing, so I'm going to go. And they always just do what Luke says, right? Because Luke was the early adopter. With Breakout, though, having 9 years of trend lines now, at one point in time, it was man, the people who are coming is suburban moms, right? And those are the people who, now that they've had 74 people tell them that it was amazing, and now that there's 4,000 5-star Google reviews, they're I think I'll try it, But the reality is, and you know this, right? You have 2 kids, I have 3 kids, of you get to a stage in life where it's hey man, I have 2 date nights a year. It's got to be nailed, right? I got to get it right. We can't be risky. We can't try the new thing. Let's try the thing that everyone says is awesome.
That makes total sense.
And so, it's been really fun and interesting. We have 10 stores across the country, is to figure out, okay, what stage are we at with our customer base? Who are we supposed to be marketing to? How do we make sure we're not leaving these folks behind, but capturing these new clients? And it's a fun, and sometimes makes you want to pull your hair out, but it's a fun challenge to solve for.
Sure. And I think in this environment, an entertainment concept, in my opinion, a lot of the younger people want to try it immediately. Everybody's rushing to a bar,
Yep.
an X-Store bar, this is so cool. But it's your job, once they come here, to do an awesome job of creating this amazing experience so they continue to come back and tell everybody and leave those great reviews. So I think what you've done is amazing and a testament to that, because anybody can open a space, really. But to be able to create an experience that people love, refer, leave reviews, tell everybody, is really the power to not have to market anymore, right? It just is organic. And so kudos to you guys for able to do that on 3 different concepts.
Yeah, not just one.
So that's really awesome. And I think a big piece of that is your food and beverage. So obviously your Blade and Timber, you've got food and beverage. You got food and beverage at most of your locations. Let's talk about Sinker's Lounge specifically.
Yep.
What was the idea? Like you mentioned already, kind of the golf idea. So what was kind of the idea around your food and beverage?
Yeah, what's been so interesting about Sinkers is, again, there's already a pretty captive audience of golfers, and golfers are passionate people, and I don't know how many golf courses in Kansas City there are. There's dozens and dozens of golf courses just in this metro. So those folks are willing to spend money, but there's also this expectation of what goes along with golf, right? I don't have the data, but I would guess that the vast majority of folks who go to a golf course to play golf are also spending money at that facility in some other way.
Sure.
And so I think one of the reasons that mini golf didn't last is they didn't provide that, right? They were only, and I'm talking the old version of mini golf, right? Is the only thing that they had going for them was the experience itself. There was no add-on. So if this experience is $20, right? The big question is hey, how can we get 25? How can we get, they're already coming.
Yep.
How can we get a couple extra dollars, both for the sake of wanting to make money, but also we know that generally speaking, those extra dollars spent are also going to add to the experience. And so for us, this is, when you look at Blade and Timber, the first version didn't have a bar. Mm-hmm. We very quickly realized man, this needs a bar, and that's why we moved from the West Bottoms to Power Light largely. With here, it was man, we're going to open with a bar. We're also going to make it a focus of what we're doing. And so really our bartenders are incredible, and in a lot of ways, they are the ones who make this what it is. Because there's an expectation if you're going to go out at Power Light, you're not just going to get, a vodka and Coke or whatever it is. Like you want something. If you're going to dedicate this as the thing that you're going to do with the Saturday, better be awesome. So having, I think, a good food program and a good beverage program is it's entertainment, right? It's
Yep, exactly.
That is the addition that has made it special.
So one of the cocktails you made here, you're right. So I'm assuming you have fun names, things like that. Like, can you tell us about one of the cocktails?
It's funny. I really focus on the entertainment portion, and I think that is my sweet spot. And so one of the things that I've had to learn to do is realize what's mine and what's not. We were talking about this a little bit off the show. Look, I don't drink alcohol, and so I never have. Not to say that I never will, but it was really important for us to hire and work alongside, folks who know what they're doing. And I think especially in the early stages, what you'd see still is, our bartenders are coming up oftentimes with the ideas and the cocktails and the names of this or that, because it's a bar program that needs to be malleable and adjust in real time in response to what's going on in the world in the first place, right? And so when the Chiefs beat the tar out of the Lions on Thursday, maybe we have a deadline on Friday or so. I don't know. I think so much of this form of entertainment space is the importance of staying relevant with culture, and so we built this facility to be very Instagrammable, for lack of a better, very, very photographic, photogenic,
Sure.
Part of that is like, man, when there's a trend, if there's a meme, like make a drink based off that meme because people are going to want that.
You're absolutely right.
So we've tried to put our people in positions to be able to make those decisions and make them quickly and make them in real time.
Well, I think it's really important. I'm glad you didn't make up a drink or tell me about a drink. I love that you went down that road, because for a lot of facility managers, even owners out there, they try and do everything. I mean, they're taking the calls, they're doing the books, they're chasing down invoices, they're making the drinks, they're doing it all. And I think it's really important for true scalability to have the team members that help support you. Like, if you're not good at making drinks, you don't drink alcohol, probably shouldn't be the one designing the drink menu. So I think it's really important to touch on that with the facility managers and the owners, is you can't do it all. So make sure you find the team to help support you. So I really appreciate you saying,
and I guess you can do it all if you have zero desire to grow, right? Like I think there are some decent owner operators who, and it's the one thing, and if that's what you want, that's great, right? It's really interesting being in these, Facebook communities or whatever of other axe throwing venue operators or other mini golf operators, and folks who they can't get out of their own way, and people who are talking about like, I've, 90-hour weeks and I can't trust anyone to leave the store or do this. And I'm just like, dude, like I was there the first week and I'm out.
Yep.
Like, cause we got to let your people do their thing.
Yep.
We had a really, really big name local Kansas City, the biggest name celebrity in Kansas City who came through recently. And, they were like, Matt, are you going to run front desk? I was like, no, man, it's not my store. Like that they've earned the opportunity to be in that space.
Yep.
And so
I
that's
love
what
it.
we're going to do.
And so to that vein, of finding a team to run it, and your point, you just opened another location. And so I know that was for Blake, but talk a little bit about what a facility manager and owner should think about before they open a second location.
I mean, we've come to realize real estate's everything, right? Like where your address is your greatest marketing asset there is. And so if you make the wrong decision of where you're going to go, like you're starting at a considerable disadvantage. Going all the way back to Breakout, like I was there all the time. But I think becoming operationally sound and really starting to understand what is it that you are and what is it that you aren't. And a lot of the folks here, whether they know it or not, they're asking themselves the question of like, what would Matt do in this situation? And it's funny to me when I go into facilities now and like, I don't know the staff or they don't know me, and it's been a strange mental challenge just from a communicative or hierarchical standpoint to realize that there's folks and I'm like, I'm their boss's 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 boss or whatever it is. But that's not indicative of the value of the person. That's just a role that we're serving in a communication standpoint. All that being said, I think to be able to set those expectations and have folks understand what it means to work here, right? Like there's billions of people, there's millions and billions of jobs. Why does someone want to have this one? And at Swell Spark, we really quickly, we call it J-Sage, it's kind of cheesy, corporate, whatever, but it's real. So our expectations is that folks are joyful, servant-minded, action-oriented, gritty, and eager. And we talk about that in every interview. And the reality is like, if a person doesn't align with that, they're just probably not a good fit to work here. They're a great fit to work somewhere else. And that's cool. But if they come in with that foundation, I think it's going to be really easy to fit in here. Yeah. And being an entrepreneurial, still an upstart company and still something that is changing often, I think those qualities help identify what it's going to be like to be successful now, but also later as we continue to change and hopefully grow, not just as a single facility, but as a company.
Sure. I think you nailed it. And I think it's really important. Not everybody can be your customer. Not everybody can be your employee. Not everybody should or wants to be that, right? So try and fit people into those holes makes it really difficult. And I as well. I learned the hard way and spent many, many years thinking that I could fit people into holes and that they weren't shaped for. And you just realize after a while that, it's probably better for them to go somewhere else anyway. They're going to be happier than trying to force them in that hole the whole time. And so I think that realization allowed me to help scale and grow all my businesses as well.
I mean, we don't have the monopoly on jobs, right? Yep. And someone said, I think you should promote them to customer. And I was like, ooh, that's a little passive aggressive, but I like the idea of it,
So back to Sinker's Lounge. Obviously you have a limited space. We're in the middle of the city. So do you ever deal with like overcrowding or wait lines, and how do you kind of deal with that?
We do. I mean, if you come on a Friday or Saturday night, there's a line, there's a line to check in, which there's pros and cons, right? Like I love if I do a drive-by and if you're walking by, you're like, ooh, there's a line. Like I think there's something mentally that's like, there's a line that it's worth it, Sure. On the same note, I don't want people waiting in line. I want them playing mini golf. And so with this being our first location, we have learned a lot about what location 2 should be like. And the biggest thing we've learned is that this location, or that our next location should be bigger. I'm not going to say this one should be bigger because it can't, right? But our next location, what we're really missing here is we're missing a great place for large groups and large parties. I'm talking 10, 20, 30 folks at a time to hang out. We don't have that here. We have a room for like 10, but our next facility will have a much better B2B private space program, that will also allow us to do overflow on a super crowded day or whatever it is. And you could go back and I could beat myself up for not having thought about this beforehand, but it's like, the reality is you don't know what you don't know, And for us, we did not fully understand how many people would want to use this for those large parties. And we know that now. And so now we'll figure out what to do with it and how to maneuver and how to adapt to larger groups wanting to do full facility buyouts. It's a great problem to try to solve for,
Sure.
But I also think just a general, all of our concepts have required an education of our consumers, an education of our customers, right? With Breakout, it's like, dude, what is it?
Yeah.
With axe throwing, is this safe?
Yeah.
And so we have to educate, hey, here's what an escape room is, and here's what it isn't. Axe throwing, here's all the things that we're doing to keep you safe, and we have alcohol, and it's still going to be an amazing experience. Here, if you're coming in thinking that this is going to be Orlando outdoor 4-acre mini golf, you're going to be disappointed.
Yep.
And so we have to do a good job of making sure our customers know what this is, right? Like, is this a mini golf facility? Yes, it is. But it's a mini golf cocktail bar, right? And like, that's a different thing than a mini golf facility. We don't have a big, like dinosaur.
T-Rex, that's exactly what I think of. The dinosaur
who's eating your golf ball.
The ball's not coming out of the clown's mouth.
Because there's not room for it.
Yep.
So we had to focus on what are the most important aspects of mini golf? What can we use? And how can we do that in a space that's also a cocktail bar?
I love it. And that's probably why, but I'm still going to ask, why did you decide to be only open, afternoons and evenings during the week?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And that's actually one that we're asking right now is like, should we be open earlier? What's been interesting post-pandemic is downtown Kansas City in the middle of the day still is not what it was even 3 or 4 years ago, right? But I think we're moving more, and I think if someone listens to this in early 2024, they'll see that we've had expanded hours since then. We're about to launch kids' birthday parties, right? We're about to launch programs to make it easier for folks to come during non-traditional hours. But part of that too is for someone to have a great time here, it requires a kitchen staff, it requires a bartender, it requires someone to set you off a menu. It's not like we can just open the doors and like have a 17-year-old kid just be like, have fun, Like we have an expectation of service that you're going to get whether you show up early or late. And there's just some realities as far as labor and numbers of is it worth it to have a bartender and a kitchen staff and front desk at 11 o'clock in the morning? And if the answer is no, then maybe we shouldn't be open then, because we're just not, we're giving them a less than experience.
Sure. I think it makes sense. And a lot of the entertainment concepts I talk to actually close Monday and Tuesday and push all of their private events and rentals and corporate buyouts to those 2 days. Have you thought about any of that sort of moving and changing as a part of what you're changing now?
What's been so fascinating is you go back to pre-pandemic and corporate rentals accounted for about 30% of our total revenue. And right now it's like 14%, right? And those numbers have kind of ebbs and flowed. And again, that number is very different in Kansas City than it is in Seattle than it is in Honolulu. Like, we're having to deal not just with, hey, what's the consumer base look like, but what's it look like in these different cities as well.
Wow.
And I think one of the challenging places about my business and the stage that I'm in is we're not a small business. We're also not a big business, right? And so from a marketing standpoint, if we're going to say, hey, we're only open on, we're closed on Monday and Tuesday for private groups, but like, what if we're not in Hawaii because it's tourism driven? How do you get that message out appropriately to say this facility operates different than this facility? Because we want to have room to be able to do that. But that creates challenges from a marketing standpoint, from an operations standpoint. Like, there's just, there's stuff you have to think about, especially when one of the core principles is how do we build something scalable and repeatable? And then if the first thing you go to is like, oh, well, let's not repeat this part of it. It's just like, okay.
Yeah. No, you have a different playbook for every single location.
That's not bad in and of itself, but it can be if you don't do it thoughtfully.
Very challenging, for sure. Like you said, the training of it to me is like, oh, well, we don't do that here. You got to train differently here. And like, just to keep track of all that and train and follow up seems really, really challenging.
Yeah, I think what's going to be fascinating, and we're opening Manhattan, Kansas next month, right? Like, so we're going from Kansas City, 2.4 million people in the metro, to Manhattan, Kansas, 50,000 people. And it dies in the summer because students aren't in session, right? And a lot of people are like, Matt, like, what are you doing, bro? You know? But I think what's going to be fun, one, we're the largest entertainment destination in Manhattan. We're the only place in all of Manhattan, Kansas that can handle a group of more than 20 people to do anything other than a bar, right? Like, or a distillery brew, whatever. We are the destination entertainment provider in Manhattan, which is cool. But what Manhattan is hopefully going to force us to think about is, if we can find a measure of success in a town of 50,000, there are a lot more 50,000 person towns than Kansas City, you know? So it opens up questions like, hey, do we franchise? Do we license? Where do we go? Where do we grow? Do we take on funding? Do we take on debt? Questions I'm eager to get to ask. But Manhattan, for us, like, we're still learning. This thing is only 18 months old. We're still learning what it is.
Sure.
You know, if your kid is, 2? Like,
2. Yep. I got a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old.
I have to step back sometimes and realize, like, for every time that I'm on a podcast because we've had some success or whatever, and I'm like, oh, we know what we're doing. I'm like, I've been doing this 8-9 years. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yep. No, I can totally relate to that. What's one of the ways, you know, with my Casey Crew business that run all the leagues, you know, we have a built-in feedback system on every week of the schedule so people can leave us feedback really easily. What's one of the ways that you take feedback and, you know, make sure you're modifying, or making sure you're, all right, we need to fix this, or, you know, all right, that's the 10th time I've heard it. Is there a way that you manage feedback?
I mean, one of the biggest ones, we ask everyone to review us online publicly, and we tell them, like, hey, how did we do? And it's not just like, give us a 5-star. Of course, do I want that 5-star review? 100%, right? But we give folks our email address so they can respond to for direct feedback. And of course, when they're posting online, my favorite thing, that's a lie. Something that, because I can't say my favorite thing starts with a 1-star review, right? Like, that would be lying.
We don't try to go in here.
It's not real.
Reviews.
But what I do enjoy is when someone gives us some feedback and we can say, hey, you know, you're right, fixed it, come back. And then they come back and they change that 1-star to a 5-star because they said, hey, this was bad and now it's not, you know? One of the funny things, I talk to my folks in the tech company or SaaS sales or whatever, and they're like, hey, we have 4 clients and they pay us $1 million a year each. So I'm like, dude, I need 4,000 people to give me $20 every week, right?
Yeah.
Which means with that review process, you also have to realize, like, we're going to disappoint people sometimes. It's not even us necessarily. Some people, they just decide to be pissed off when they wake up in the morning. But to sift through that feedback and decide, like, oh, hey, we're seeing a trend, or hey, this store is not performing to the same, like, the goal is to get better, right? And so you can't do that without feedback. At the end of the day, what we see as the operators oftentimes is the best feedback, which means getting in the store and looking around and seeing like, oh my gosh, that or this or that.
Sure.
But you have to, unless you want to fade off and drift away into oblivion.
Just curious, because I don't do a lot with Google reviews in my business day to day, because I find great team members like you do. But do you manage? Is there a technology you use to manage your Google reviews? Right?
Yeah, I mean, when you were introing, I was like, how many technologies do we use, right? And so our booking and waiver software automatically has the ability to send out a review ask, and we can point that to Google or to TripAdvisor or to Yelp or whatever maybe medium we think is the most important at that point in time in order to gain more reviews or traction or whatever.
Sure.
But yeah, awareness is still the name of the game for us, right? Like, what's bizarre for me in Kansas City is sometimes my head gets big and I'm like, oh, like, I'm one of the cool kids and I'm in the entrepreneur club. And then you go out and you're like, yeah, I'm with Breakout KC. They're like, oh, what's that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, really? I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, it's an escape room. Like, oh, the things you put in your basement for intruders? I'm like, no. And this is a real conversation that happened last week.
Oh my gosh.
And the reviews, though, they're huge because these are testaments of people saying, hey, I had a great time or I had a terrible time, and we get to respond and fix it. So yeah, we're using the technology for waivers, we're using technology for booking, we're using technology for reviews, we're using technologies.
I love it. Any thoughts on membership? I know a lot of like pickleball places and, some of these newer entertainment concepts are doing membership driven, to obviously drive revenue.
Yep.
But also, reward your fans who really want that extra touch point, want to have special events and want to rave about you. So have you thought about membership at all?
We've thought about it. And honestly, we were set to launch it when we first opened and we didn't. There were a couple kinks that we wanted to work out. And I think one of the things that's really funny and frustrating about being in a position like ours is like when those things just kind of fade away, memberships I think would be great here. And there's no reason that we haven't done them other than that we haven't done them. And part of it is based off the software you're using, the technology, or how do you manage it? How does it integrate with the POS and this and that? And then sometimes when those problems, don't seem as big as whatever you're dealing with, you just kind of like, oh, we'll get to it later.
Yeah, maybe not now.
And then later becomes 19 months. And you're like, oh yeah, remember when we thought that thing was going to spin off an additional $40,000 in revenue a year and we just haven't done it because we're lazy?
Sure.
Or we forgot or whatever. So mental note, Luke, I need to revisit our membership.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Facility Ally can do a lot of that stuff. So I'd like to chat with you about that. I know you've already mentioned a lot of things you would do differently. You're doing a bigger space. You're already doing it. But maybe though, what's one thing that a facility manager or owner should think about before they open their space that you've learned over all of your years of all the different concepts? I know you said real estate. That was one thing you mentioned off screen too, was like you're now getting into real estate, trying to own the building. I'm stealing all your ideas, so I'll stop.
Yeah, I think, one of the things, and I think there's seasons where we've learned things. And one of the things that we learned in the midst of the pandemic is that your lease really matters, and we did not in the early stages like have an attorney review our leases because we thought we did it like, it's, whatever, sign it off.
Yep.
I think some of those just found out foundational elements in the early stages of like, hey, know what you're getting into, know what you can do, know what you can't do. What's really interesting about this facility is we can't have live music. And it makes sense. And it's because they want to drive live music to the live block, right? So that's like when we were talking about things that we've seen successful in other things, we're like, oh my gosh, they're doing this thing. Hey, we can't do that. Hard stop,
Yep.
And so I think just maybe before you press go, hopefully you have a group of friends who do that, but just taking a step back, talking with other facility managers and just getting to ask and answer those questions, I think is really important. I think the single most important thing though is who are you going into it with, and I think what is your goal in doing so? I kind of fell into this space and I had no goal. I just wanted to do something fun, right? And then all of a sudden created a successful business. And you start to realize as we had people come approach to buy us or to invest in us, and they're like, hey, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm having a good time, I guess. Yeah. But it's hard to assess decisions if you don't know what the end goal is in the first place, right?
100%.
And so I would encourage folks to consider what that is. And it can change, right? Like it is totally okay to change, but you have to have that first stake in the ground so you know what you're changing from.
Yep.
Someone told me a while back, like, hey, businesses stop in 3 ways. They either go out of business, they get passed on to someone, or they get sold. That's it. Those are the only 3 ways that a business ever ends. And so even to be like, okay, which of those do I want, right? Like, okay, I don't want to go out of business. That's an easy one. Do I want to pass this on to my kids or my employees, or do I want to sell it? And I didn't know the answer to that for the first 5 years that I did this, right? And now I know. I'd love to sell this at some point in time, you know?
Sure.
So I think what I've loved over the last decade-ish is just realizing how big of a world business is, what an incredible lens it is and can be to look through life, but also just the things that the ways that it's taught me, you know, about myself as well. But a lot of people, I think so many of the things that get given as advice aren't real because the first 2 months of a facility are just so different than year 2 or year 3 or year 4. And even if you were to give year 4 advice, it doesn't even compute, right?
Yeah.
Because you just don't have the intake.
I think that's really important too, because 2 things I don't want to forget. One is, you know, kind of one of my favorite books is Start With Why. And that's to your point of like, if you don't have your why, year 1's hard, year 2's harder, year 3's harder. If you lose you don't have this why ever to begin with, once it gets harder, you just kind of want to quit, right? Yep. But if you have your why of like, I'm building this for my kids, I'm building this to sell it for freedom, whatever that why is, then it's easier to keep moving forward as those years get harder. So I love that you said that, and I totally agree. I used to run my kickball leagues every day and leave my day job at 5 and go ump the games every night. It was fun. It was awesome. 3 years later, I got this huge business. I have no idea what I'm doing, right? So it can constantly change, right? I learned that I didn't love umping kickball, so I wanted to help grow the business and hired some kickball reps. So totally agree there. Completely separate topic, but I want to go back to it is, what is your ideal lease term? And I think that's really important for people that are looking to get into this space. Is the first one 3 years? Is the second one 10 years? You know, what is your kind of sweet spot there?
You know, and I am a elbow grease entrepreneur, right? Like I've never taken on funding. I've never taken on VC. I've never and part of it is I don't understand the world. Part of it is because it intimidates me. Part of it is because I like control. But one of the biggest frustrations of this industry is that more often than not, these facilities are not asset-based, right? So when we go to a bank and say, hey, we want some money to grow this, they say, what's your collateral? We say, the 4,000 people that we hope come through the door next week and the week after. Like we have none, period.
Yep.
Which in a banking lens makes us high risk, which is a bummer. And what it's forced us to do, right, is we've grown out of cash flow. Like every store we've built has just been with the money that we already made, which is a great way to grow in some ways, right? But if I would have had more money, theoretically, 5 years ago when, you know, the axe throwing concept was just exploding and I could have done 20 stores instead of 3, like, dude, I could be on a beach sipping a virgin Mai Tai right now.
Because they went to Jado.
And am I upset? Like, I'm not upset about that, but it's just like, oh, it's that realization. And so the facility that we opened last week in Lawrence, you know, downtown Lawrence, it's a 160-year-old building on Mass Street, which is an incredible district. It's one of the coolest downtowns of any small town in America, right? And for the first time, we own the building. So we own the building that we're leasing from, and part of that is we're building a new asset class as a company, right? So that hopefully 5 years from now, 1, maybe we've paid a building off with the lease, and 2, when we decide, hey, we want to scale whatever concept we're focused on in 5 years, they say like, oh, what's your collateral? We say, how about this this building right here? They're like, deal, you know? And then we can do that. But I would say for those folks that are, I'm going to call it the mom and pops, right? The Matt Baysingers of the world who are not taking on VC money or this or that, like that minimum viable product. Like first you need to figure out, do people want to do the thing that you want to do in the first place? Because your early adopters, they'll go to the West Bottoms.
Yep.
They'll go to the, you know, what was the Crossroads 15 years ago? They'll go to those right out of downtown type areas. Make sure they like it before you sign a 10-year, $10 million lease or whatever it is. Those are made up numbers, but those can be real numbers, right?
Sure.
So I think that's know what you're leveraging, you know? And one of the things that I say to folks asking for advice is like, hey, you should understand what's the worst that could happen, and we saw it in the pandemic. Like I was 42 days away from bankruptcy, right? I knew my exact runway to the day. I was like, if nothing changes, that day is when we run out, and fortunately it didn't. But I think for a lot of people, the worst case scenario feels a lot worse than it actually is. And so I think beginning with the end in mind of knowing like, hey, if this doesn't work out, what does that look like? And just knowing that that's an option on the table and being willing to ask yourself, hey, is this still worth it? And that way, whether you decide to sign that lease at the alt outside of downtown area or main and main, you at least are going into it with eyes wide open. And I think that's having eyes wide open on your financial health is the thing that has been the most frustrating at times and probably the biggest piece of advice that I'd give right now. But again, just knowing what you're getting into. So many people don't.
Yep.
They don't know.
I love what you said about thinking about the worst case scenario, because to your point, nobody really thinks through that in actual detail. Like, all right, what happens if we don't open today?
Yep.
What like actually happens?
Yeah.
Maybe 100 people didn't get to come here, right?
Sure.
Oh man, we let 100 people down, which is not something you ever want to do in business. There's still how many other people out there that you can succeed for the next day.
Yep.
And so I think people just, they think through, worst case scenario, like someone's going to die. Well,
right.
Hopefully, no, that never happens, right? And most time it doesn't. And so I think if you actually think through, well, if this happens, then this happens, then this happens, I'm still okay.
Yeah.
And you're able to actually manage a little bit more as far as mental health goes.
Yeah, and mine literally was like, hey, my worst case is I'm moving with my parents, with my family. And I was like, you know what? Like, and it sounds so silly, and I'm very fortunate to have that as my legitimate worst case, right? I was like, hey, worst case, I'm squatting in my parents' basement for a year. I was like, honestly, is that bad? No.
Yep.
Like, parents are pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think the biggest part, I think, is perception, right?
Yeah.
I feel like everybody's going to judge you.
Sure.
Everybody's going to say all these things.
Yeah.
And again, if you can get past that, no one's going to even know you're in the basement.
And
right?
that's the
Or it doesn't
thing,
even
right?
matter.
That was the hardest thing to get. That's the hardest thing, I think, mentally. Of like, I think you picture Chris Farley as like him living in a van down by the river.
Eating government cheese.
Like, you know what? Like, no, that's not.
Yeah.
That's not what's going to happen. Unless you make your parents hate you as well in the process. Like, the reality is, your worst case ain't that bad.
Yeah.
It's demoralizing, maybe, or whatever. But again, I think, and one of the problems that we had, right? And problem is maybe not the right word, but weighing the worst case, but also weighing the best case. And what we came to about 3 years into our business is we had a lot of success, and the partners that I had at the time had different ideas of what we wanted to do with that success, right? I immediately went to like, let's grow, let's do it again. And one of the partners I was with was like, no. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
was not expecting that, And so that became a really tough challenge to figure out, how do we navigate this thing where we just want different things. Again, neither of them are bad, but like, we go to a restaurant and you want spaghetti and a burger, and they have both options. It's like, dude, you got to eat you're like, well, I want spaghetti.
Sure.
Yeah, we're getting in some weeds. But I think the weeds are fun, right? The weeds are fun.
Tastes like spaghetti.
Yeah.
No, I love it. I think that's important, even for, if you're just a facility manager, you're the one running everything every day. These are things you should be thinking about, right? Because at the end of the day, you may not own the facility, but you also need a why. You also need to know what your exit strategy is. You need to know all those things. And so I love that we were able to dive into some of these topics today. To wrap it up, what does the next 3 years look like for Sinkers Lounge?
I mean, Sinkers is going to grow, we will know in about 6 months if that growth is going to be focused on, call it small markets or mid markets. There are huge players in the mini golf space who are VC backed and have hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're gobbling up every, call it NFL market there is. So we know that's probably not where we're growing. The question is, do we need to go to the Des Moineses of the world, right? The Tulsas, or do we need to go to the Lawrences and the Manhattans?
Sure.
And we're going to find out. And then once we find out, that's what we're going to do. I think what's going to be fun about Sinkers as well, that the folks who have come in the first year and a half is like, all of these golf holes can move and change. And so Rev 2 of Sinkers, even here in Kansas City, we're excited to be able to continually revamp this space to bring people back, to have tournaments, to have leagues, to have memberships, to have all these things where, this becomes the neighborhood hangout. And I think we can do that.
I love it. Well, you're definitely going to need Facility Ally if you're going to run all those things in one talk, man. Make sure you check out Facility Ally if you're looking to run leagues, tournaments, memberships, reservations all in one place. And thank you again, Matt, for having us. Really appreciate it. Love what you're doing. Been a big fan for a long time, so appreciate you having us out. And we'll see you next time on the Facility Playbook.